Welcome to the One Question Leadership Podcast. This is Jeff Mitchell. I believe leaders must be anticipatory to chart a path forward. We can either be proactive and move forward, or sit back and be reactive and risk falling behind. Wayfinders Lead, the NCAA Pathway Program, is designed to incubate and inspire the next generation of executives in our profession. I am grateful for my pathway experience and encourage others to explore their own opportunity in the NCAA Pathway Program.
Greetings, this is Ty Brown, and welcome to the One Question Leadership Podcast, where we highlight executive and organizational leadership. Be sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram at 1Q Leadership. We are joined today by Sarah Baumgartner. Sarah is the Executive Senior Associate Athletics Director for Sport Administration at Texas, and Bill McGillis. Bill is a retired athletics director, retired veteran, senior leader, mentor, and a whole bunch of other things. Glad you both are on today. Greetings.
Probably the happiest guy at NACTA this week.
I think so.
100%.
He's just chilling.
Not weighed down by all the issues, right?
Exactly.
I'm glad to have both of you on. Bill, I've been trying to get you for about 3 or 4 years since I started working with Matt Roberts at D1 Ticker. I recently had him on, and he told me the story of how he started the ticker. So like Bill McGillis wanted all the current information, so Matt would read all 300 articles, print out things, and put it in front of Bill. And over time, the vetting process of understanding what was important, because what he wanted to read and what Matt was interested in, it came down to Matt just giving him what he thought was important. That, over time, turned into what now is the D1 ticker, right? And so I thought that was super interesting.
It's true. And I've got to add one thing to that.
Yeah.
This dossier project and service that's available. I think that came about because when I was a candidate for an AD job a number of years ago, a long time ago, Matt and I worked together on he assisted me with my presentation material. I'd been studying this job for a long time. It was like my dream job.
Oh, really?
So we had literally, I think, 2 or 3 3-inch binders cataloging everything I wanted to know about that institution. I think that led to what
now it's
D1 dossier is, and it's digital now, so it's a little different.
I find what I find interesting about that whole story is we take the experiences we have in our lives, and if we're smart enough and creative enough, we learn how to execute on those experiences to make them something that we can either make a career out of or learn out of. So super inspiring.
Some people do that.
Some people do that.
Some
right?
really smart people. Matt among them.
Right.
You as well, Tom.
Hopefully, right? All I do is make people think by asking questions. That's my talent. That's what I'm doing, right? Leaning into it. Sarah, Sport Administration, we're here at NACTA, and you've helped to create something where you said there's like 150 participants from all aspects of college athletics that are over some type of sport trying to learn how to be better at that. Tell us a little bit about that program.
Yeah, it's exciting. I think when my job at Texas is unique. It's like one that hasn't existed at Texas like this is now. So my job when I wake up, feet on the ground, is be a voice for all of our coaches to CDC, and then from CDC back to our coaches. And it's wild. It's amazing. But I think a lot of times as sport administrators, we get thrown the sport because the coach, loves us, trusts us, and then there's no playbook on how to do it right. And I think so the goal ultimately is just to professionalize it, to give a chance to share best practices and how do you deliver in terms of being an advocate, holding your coaches accountable, being a great buffer between the AD and the coach and all that stuff. So it's awesome. The room is full at 9 a.m. and it went from 9, they'll finish at 5:30. And it's just a great group of people who are just anxious to learn. And so we're all doing it together. And we opened up, we're like, hey, we're not in this to tell you how to do it. We're in this to learn together and talk about it. So yeah, it's a brand new track for NACTA. It's really fun.
It is. You're over sport administration. Does that mean that all the coaches don't report into you?
They report to CDC, but I'm responsible for everything.
Everything they
for
need.
Them. Yep.
How many sports?
We have 21. So from football to beach volleyball, everything. It's it's personnel, it's recruiting, it's budget, it's compliance, it's under the sun ecosystem. Now there's administrators who help me that work with those coaches. But at the end of the day, CDC's there's got to be one consistent approach, one management style, and I want that delivered from me through you to the administrators, to the coaches, to their staff, to their director of operations. So it's a unique model. And I shared earlier today at the discussion, like my whole career has been in fundraising revenue, right? So totally external facing, threw a couple sports at me because like I could raise money and the coach was like, hey, she can get stuff done for me. Not because she's like a talented advocate or whatever, so, and then, CDC says, hey, come to Texas, and it kind of imagines this role. And so it's just a wild change for me in the coolest way. Cause like now my portfolio business versus donors is coaches, their families. Like to me, it's such a different, I don't know, I guess meaningful way to like handle relationships with people. So yeah, it's fun. It's different.
Let me add something to that, Ty, because I mean, kudos to you, Sarah, and NACTA.
Right.
And I did not know this was occurring.
Mm-hmm.
It is so overdue.
Right?
So overdue.
I was like, where was this 20 years ago?
No, exactly. And the model at Texas is a fantastic model. Fantastic model. And I'm fairly confident that there's going to be other people that adopt that model. There would be certain places that wouldn't have that would have some resource constraints, perhaps, where you wouldn't have the depth of leadership available for that maybe to be successful. Mm-hmm. But the principle of the model is can go anywhere, can travel, and this is a really an advancement in our industry to have that kind of session here and extend beyond this. The other thing I want to say about that, and this was something important to me, and just a nugget for you, Sarah, and I actually talked to Mick Haley about this, who was the head coach at Texas at one time in volleyball and national championship coach, and he was really fascinated by this. I'd wanted to do this at Southern Miss when I was the AD, and I just didn't get to it. But when I went to San Diego, and when you make a change like that, you can introduce a lot of new things all of a sudden. And I abandoned the term sport administrator.
Okay.
And at San Diego, and this may change when Kimya arrives, but for me, from the day I arrived, from the first meeting with our head coaches and the first meeting with our full staff, I referred to people in that role as sport facilitators. Because to me, the role, I've always felt this, when I was coming up through the ranks, when I had that sport administration role, I always felt like, and I wanted others to see it this way, that the role, in my mind, is to facilitate the success of those head coaches, those programs, and those scholar athletes. And by putting that term in the label, the day I arrived, it told everybody at Southern Miss that was on that, or at San Diego, that was on that staff and had that role, just by labeling it that way, this is how it's kind of going to be. You're a facilitator.
Right.
It's not about being the boss. It's collaboration and it's facilitating
the success
and greatness and championships and an amazing experience.
Yeah, I think that's
just to go on that point, because I think there's a lot of folks who are, like get their first sport and they're like, all right, I'm going to meet with the head coach once a week and we're going to have all these meetings because they feel in some way they are the boss of that coach. And so one of the things we're talking about, like just the core basics. You don't have to be the boss.
Yeah.
You have to be an advocate, be a champion, have hard conversations, like to your point, like it's a great way to frame it.
It's a great way to frame it. I noticed you said scholar athletes, and
it was beautiful.
I interviewed, why is his name slipping me? UC San Diego.
Earl.
Yeah.
Earl?
And that's
Edwards?
something he said. We call all our student athletes scholar athletes,
I think
too.
he heard me do it and he just stole
Really?
it
Is that what it was?
It's unbelievable.
Is that where it came from?
That's Earl, man.
Yeah, right.
No,
That's hilarious.
No, that's true.
Uh-huh.
And that was another thing from the get-go. Everything we wrote, social media, was referring to those women and men as scholar athletes, regardless of whether they're a 4.0 student or a 2.1 student, because everybody's capacity and is different, and I wanted every athlete to view themselves as a scholar athlete, and then in terms of branding of our program at USD, which is very high graduation rate, I wanted that to be, part of the brand that we were trying to develop. And, it's the same at Texas and a lot of places.
I think that's excellent. I want to ask both of you this question. We're in the business of people, and everybody has a process of, for lack of a better word, vetting people for positions. Tell me a story about interviewing people one time. I think we were at NABC, and I don't know if it was for, I think it was a head coach. Was it a head coaching position or
Yeah,
basketball position, something like that?
we might have talked about that,
Yeah.
and I just referenced that today, actually, so
Yeah.
I will tell it. This is amazing, Sarah. This one, this was our men's basketball search 2 years ago, and and it was a very important hire for us. We had made a change after 4 years of a guy I loved, but it was not, we were not advancing it the way we wanted to, and so made a change. And I wanted to be really, really thorough. I wanted to look at a lot of different types of candidates. I wanted to look at current college head coaches, assistant coaches, at the top assistants at the top programs in the country, NBA people, and USD has like 20 alums of the university that work in the NBA, 2 head coaches. So we have this NBA thing, and so I had gotten to know that league well, and so as I put together a board, and I had a category of broadcasters that were former coaches, and you can think through who some of those names are, and so I've been developing that board throughout the year. So start on the search, and it was not one where I had to get this done in 3 days. I mean, it just wasn't that way. So it took a solid 3 weeks. I interviewed 18 people. No, I interviewed 19 people from all realms, and I had that search down to, we had 4 or 5 candidates on campus, and the final 4 was like the next week, and so had it whittled down to 4 or 5. Went to the final 4 to do a couple of second interviews, and then was going to pull the trigger in New Orleans at the final 4. And on the way to the final 4 on the airplane on that Thursday, Steve Lavin texted me. And Steve Lavin was working for Fox at the time, former head coach at St. John's and UCLA. And in between each one of those, he was at ESPN for a stint and Fox most recently. And Coach Lavin had, I think, definitely Wasserman, his agency, had reached out probably early, at least 2 weeks before. I'd stiff-armed him. Didn't even pay attention. I had other people I was honed in on. Steve might have sent something to me at one point. I'm not sure, but I'm flying to New Orleans to finish the deal with one of 2, probably.
Yeah.
And I get a text in the air from Steve Lavin, and he's really in a kind way said, "Hey, I'm in New Orleans with Fox, and if you have a moment, I'd be honored to be able to speak with you about your job." And he did that directly. So the next day, I had mapped out what I was going to do, but I had a window of time, and so I said, I called him. He didn't pick up. I left a message. I'd never met him, and but I had a perception of Steve Lavin as from his UCLA days. He was Jay Wright before Jay Wright and Pitino. It was slick back hair and 3-piece suits. When Lav was coaching, he got the UCLA job when he was 32, and and so he didn't pick up, and he missed the call, but he quickly called me back, and I said, "Hey, I've got an hour. I want to give myself an out." And I said, "I've got an hour if you want to come to the hotel, or we can do it right now by phone." He said, "I'm coming over." I said, "Oh, I'll meet you downstairs." We ended up talking for 9 hours.
Stop.
Literally, maybe 8. We had to move restaurants 2 times.
Wow.
Because they were closing, and met with him again the next morning. Like, dang. I called my president, who happened to be in town, because he was on the NCAA board of directors. I said, "Hey," and he had never heard Steve Lavin's name out of my mouth on this chart I had, nothing, and told him about Coach Lavin. Said, "Would you have lunch with him?" He loved him, and there were a few other dynamics I'm leaving out, but I left New Orleans with Steve Lavin as our basketball coach. And sometimes searches go that way, So that's one that comes to mind for me. And I don't even know if that's the one I shared with you, but that comes to mind.
Interesting. Sarah, I'm sure you've had to interview people. Did you have 9-hour dinners with the people you interviewed?
No, but it sounds lovely. I wish I could have been at that dinner. I want to know what they talked about.
What are you talking about, right?
Yeah.
It's funny because I'd never met him. I had a perception, and I, like 10 minutes into it, in my mind, I'm going, wow, this guy has substance.
Mm-hmm.
Which I had no idea if Steve Lavin had substance. I just didn't know, because the perception of him was not sure if he could coach on the court. Some people, had that narrative around him. And it was because he became a coach at 32 and was great looking and had slick back hair. Why did he get the job at UCLA at 32, And so people always kind of had this narrative around him. And so, but like 10 minutes into it, I'm like,
Did you kind of know? You're like, okay,
kind of like, wow, I like this guy.
Yeah, super interesting.
Kind of a little different than I thought. Sorry.
That's all right.
Keep going, sir.
I wonder about your experiences vetting people in the interview process, I guess.
You want to know like stories, or what do you want to know?
I don't know.
What?
Just how do you approach it?
do
Do
it?
you have a checklist? Is it a field thing? Is it I interviewed Heather Like the other day, and she told me about a person index, something. I was like, what is that? And it was just a way to assess how these people fit into, so it's not all just field. There's actually some data behind it or something. So
I think Heather's really smart, and I should have that too. I don't know. Did you have that?
No,
I was like, I'm all on feel and gut.
We need to listen to that podcast. Is what we need
I'm
to
downloading
do.
that for the plane ride home. I mean, for us, and I've been with CDC for 3 years, and obviously before that was a part of searches. But I feel like the best intel, at least we've gotten, and we've made 4 or 5 hires together, and I've watched him do what he does. It's always the network off the network that you're calling people about who the right coach is, right? It's calling the coach that maybe won't take your job, that will tell you who should take your job, So to me, it's cliche, it's all relationship based, but it's about who you trust and know to tell you who you should be going after. That's really worked for us, and having that network. And obviously, I give a lot of credit to CDC. He's got his Rolodex is running far and wide, and mine's growing as well. But having the ability to network and different, right? Could be a swimming coach, could be a basketball coach, could be football. It's like that circle of folks and who the experts in that space that you trust that will give you real information, and it's helped. So, but I really think the Heather Like idea is fabulous. I'm definitely listening to that podcast. I got no science behind it, Ty. No science.
I'm intrigued.
Yeah,
I'm never going to hire a coach again, but I'm intrigued by that concept.
I was my style of interviewing is like, I don't know what I'm talking about before, but let's go, and you say something interesting. It's like improv. We find that thing, I'm leaning into that thing. So
I'll tell you, I gotta ask Sarah about this, Ty. I think one of the in my opinion, one of the factors that separates coaches, good ones from great ones, is the ability to evaluate talent. The skill of evaluating is a separator, a difference maker. And yet for an administrator, and in nearly every case, you haven't played the sport of the particular sport that you're hiring a head coach for. You might have played one in college, or a couple before that, but and so as an administrator, figuring out how to assess and evaluate that particular skill I just mentioned of the coach evaluating talent, is that's challenging. How to, did you just go by the recruiting rankings?
What do you use?
It's more. Is there, the track record of who ended up at the particular school, and how did they develop kids, and
all those things.
But it's always been fascinating to me how to figure that out, because I think it's the thing that stands out to me the most as a separator.
Mm-hmm.
Integrity, and there's these fundamentals, ability to teach and all that.
But evaluating
But the one who's choosing the right women or right men over a coach with similar resources, a similar great institution, but who evaluates different. I mean, to me, it's.
I totally agree. I think I put that as A1 priority. I think the second thing, that just watching a coach also surround themselves with the people that they need to surround themselves with. So their staff too, because it's getting the talent to come and compete and develop and grow. And then it's also like, who does a coach have enough self-awareness, enough EQ to know, like, hey, I might have a blind spot here, or I'm not the best at this, and be able to get talent around them. And some of the ones that we've seen struggle the ones that maybe haven't made those same decisions, or they've been loyal too long, or they just,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? So I don't know, for us, it's also
Absolutely.
like, who are you going to surround yourself with?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
guess that's the
Or
first,
who you bring with you.
the first layer
Yeah.
of judging their talent and evaluation is
Yeah.
like who's
Yeah.
on your
Curious,
staff
like-
and why,
Yeah,
right?
no, and I totally agree with Sarah on that. And I think some senior level administrators are afraid that they may think a candidate, especially if it's a high profile candidate, there might be a fear factor of being vulnerable enough to ask, not really challenge, but come to understand. I am exactly with Sarah. I want to understand. It's not a one-man show or a one-woman show. This is going to be a collective effort of a staff.
Why this person?
Led
why
by
that person?
led by a exceptional head coach,
Yeah.
but it's not a one-man show or one-woman show. So I'm someone who really, that matters to me.
Mm-hmm.
I think
Yeah,
there's
we
some
ask
other
that question
colleagues of
every
mine.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think there's some colleagues of ours that are either afraid or they may think it's not their role, and whatever the coach wants to do is great. But I'm just not that way.
Same.
I need to know.
Yeah. And it's not to meddle or to pick for them. It's just to understand how you think, who you want
Exactly.
around you, like who's in the trenches with you, right? It's like, who's your right hand? And when it's like, those things matter.
My follow-up is, so you hire the coach, it's been a year or two, and now they either making some changes or somebody leaves to get a head coaching job. Do you still inquire and try to understand who they're bringing on? Like, is that a continual question, or is it just in the initial? Because now they can evaluate talent because you've hired them and they win. Like, are you still curious about who they're going to bring on over time as staff leaves?
We trust them to make that decision.
After you've already gained the trust. In terms of how
like
they-
one misstep I did make recently, and this is like, at one of our programs, our head coach, who's phenomenal. We trust him. He's so successful. And he, has a really talented former head coach who's going to come be an assistant for him, right? So in my mind, we're running, right? Like, this guy's great. He wants to come. Let's do it. And he had a couple of hiccups in his past, right? So you Google him. It's like, oh, not that we didn't hire him because he's on our staff, but it was just, for me, it was the extra step that I hadn't taken to just make sure we're aware and we're prepared for when somebody asks, well, wait, what about his past, right? So I'm go back to the same thing, not meddling, not choosing. If we've got to choose our assistant coaches, we probably don't have the right head coach. That's
Right.
the way we
that's true.
operate.
Yeah,
But
100%.
I want to make sure I protect our head coach, because sometimes they're running so fast, like, and they may know and had already answered, but I got to make sure I'm protecting the AD, like in your
Yeah.
chair or CDC, like to know that. So that's just more due diligence than anything.
Yeah, I think I would see that the same way. That's
I
great
accept that.
perspective.
I have a couple questions and then we'll wrap. First question is, Sarah, I usually don't ask people if they want to be an AD when they're in their current position because I don't want anybody saying something on record, right? So I'll say it like this. At some point, you may become the Prime Minister of Canada, and I wonder what kind of role you look for if you look for a leadership role. But then I also, with Bill here, this expert mentor here, I wonder what kind of advice you give someone who's looking for a leadership role type situation. I don't know who wants to answer that first.
I can
Go ahead,
go first.
Sarah.
I'd love to
Go
hear
ahead.
you say, Bill. For me, any opportunity that I've been in is always like who I am working for. Like, to come to Texas was because Crystal Conte said, Sarah, come to Texas, right? When I went to Rutgers, Julie Herman was the AD at the time. She left, new AD comes like before that. So it's, to me, as I've learned, it's just, you're in this thing every day. The hours you put in, it's crazy. So if it's not fun and you don't love and trust who you're working for, so that's it for me. Now, the opportunity, I want to make a positive impact. I want to have, be successful, have a
things,
chance to win, and I'm a competitor, so those things all have to kind of be in that portfolio of what that opportunity could be. But it's just leadership, like who's
So it would, on a higher level, it would be a president. It would be, board
Yep.
of governors, like who am I surrounded with
Yep.
in terms of to help the
Yep.
institution be successful.
Yeah, I do think it's all about people. I was just that caused me to think about, I don't know that Bob Bodine originated this line, but in his book, In the Power of Who, he refers to, people in our industry always talk about, and coaches, what's a great job? Is that a great job? Is that a good job? And Bob in his book wrote, if it may not be exactly this, but a great job is doing what you love, with people you love, where you love. And that was, the last 7 years for me at the University of San Diego before I was done, that was like a special kind of dynamic. And it's been that way at some other places for me too. And I concur with with what Bob Bodine said in The Power of Who. That is a great job. And so I guess, if I was providing counsel to someone, I think that's a good way to think about it. Now you're speculating a bit, but you can generally get a good sense of the people in advance of accepting an opportunity. At San Diego, I was the AD at Southern Miss, and Glenn Sugiyama handled that search for San Diego, and he called me about it, and he wanted me to come in, and I said, let me just come in and meet with the president. And I did. So I just went in, had dinner with the president, and then flew back to Mississippi. And it was a little bit like my time with Steve Lavin. I knew like 5 minutes into it with Jim Harris, and I hadn't been on the campus. I knew what Jim Harris was all about, the president of the University of San Diego. And I knew. And that was it. I mean, I knew it was West Coast. We're a West Coast family. We hadn't been in the West in 20 plus years, but so I was drawn to that. We happened to be Catholic, so I was drawn to a Catholic institution. I knew the WC, all that. But that was just stuff. But sitting down with Jim Harris that night at dinner, 5 minutes into it, I'm like, wow, this guy is special. And that turned out to be the case for 7 great years. So that's and Sarah started that. That's just, it's people.
That's important, yeah. That conversation lasted only 9 hours. It was a 7-year relationship, I guess you said, huh? So this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate both of you joining me here on the One Question Leadership Podcast.
That was like 4 questions. Why do you call this the One Question Leadership Podcast?
Because there's usually one key question in here. And I think the key question out of this conversation probably has to do with people. That was Sarah Baumgartner. She is the Executive Senior Associate Athletic Director for Administration at Texas. And Bill McGillis. Bill was the Athletics Director at University of San Diego and Southern Mississippi. And of course, I am Ty Brown with One Question. And keep in mind, the role of a leader is to create and maintain an environment that people want to be a part of. And as always, be better tomorrow than you are today. This episode of the One Question Leadership Podcast is produced by Spades Media Group, solving problems using creative leadership.